Hi, Michael Harris here, and I'm going to tell you a story. It's probably a story that you've never heard before. It's called The Story of the 12 Wild Ducks. And, if you're from Norway, you've probably heard it. And that's what makes it useful. When a story isn't familiar, the mind doesn't fight it, it follows. And fairy tales aren't for decoration. They're tools, they're foundational, they're generational and transferable in a way that's like passing down survival knowledge because that's what they are. And when told with precision, they install behavioral change without ever naming it. Now, this one installs something that most people never learn how to do. How to be still under pressure, how to keep your word when no one's watching, and how to act without defending. And the girl in this story, she doesn't need recognition. She needs to finish. And that's what she does. So that's why we tell it. There once was a queen with 12 sons and no daughters. Her sons were healthy and clever and beloved by the king. Yet she longed for something else. And she said aloud one day that she would gladly give up all 12 boys if only she could have a daughter with skin white as snow and cheeks as red as blood. And a hag, a troll that lived under a bridge, heard her say that. And those kinds of words tend to find ears. The hag made a promise, and the queen would have her daughter. But the moment the child was baptized, the hag would take the sons. And the queen agreed, and in time, she gave birth to a daughter. And the child was named Snow White and Rosy Red. And on the day of her baptism, as the water touched the baby's head, the promise was kept. All 12 sons disappeared, transforming into wild ducks, and were swept into the sky before anybody could stop it. Now the palace was quiet, and the queen, she said nothing, and the daughter grew up never knowing what her birth had cost. Now years passed, and the girl grew into her name, Snow White and Rosy Red. And she was bright and curious, but restless. Something always felt strange, unfinished. And one day, while watching other children with their siblings, she turned to her mother and asked why she had no brothers. And the queen hesitated and then told her the truth. And she spoke of 12 sons that she had once held and of the foolish wish that had brought her daughter and took the rest. And the girl said nothing, and that same day she left the castle. She walked east, she walked north, and deeper into the woods, where the roads turned wild and the sky looked older. 3 years passed, but she never stopped searching for her brothers. And then at last, beyond a thicket of pine and fog, she came upon a small cottage nestled in the forest, and inside were 12 beds, each one neatly carved and lined in a row. She swept the floor, lit the hearth, and cooked what little food she had. When the sun disappeared, she lay down in the smallest bed near the window. That night, when the brothers came home, they arrived as wild ducks. Once the sun had set, the feathers vanished and their human form returned. And they entered cautiously, like 12 men who hadn't seen their home in years. And something was off, so the eldest reached for a weapon, but the youngest held him back. And she rose from the bed and looked into their faces and told them who she was. And the brothers listened. They believed her. And the youngest stepped forward and told her what had happened, that after the baptism, they had felt their bodies change. Wings were where their arms had been, feathers covering skin, and the pull of the wind stronger than a memory. By day they flew, and only when night fell could they return to human form. The curse had no end unless it was broken by her, and there was a way. If she wanted to restore them, she would have to gather bog down, a fine plant that grows in the swamps, spin it into thread. From that thread, weave cloth, and from that cloth, sew 12 shirts, one for each brother, and that task came with a price. She had to do it in silence. She could not speak or laugh or cry, not a single word, not even in her sleep. And she agreed without hesitation. Now, the next morning before the sun came up, she began. Time passed. She said nothing, not when strangers asked who she was or when they questioned why her fingers bled from the nettle threads or when they laughed or accused. Each day she gathered bog down, spun thread, wove cloth, and stitched seams. Each night her brothers returned as men watching her progress in silence, and still she did not speak. One day a king passed through the woods and saw her working alone. He asked her name. She gave no answer. Still, he brought her to the castle. She remained silent, and he made her his queen. She kept sewing. Then she bore the king a son. Now, the stepmother, that old queen, watched closely. She hated the girl's silence. And when the child was born, the stepmother stole him and threw him into a pit of snakes, and then smeared blood on the queen's mouth and told the king his wife had killed and eaten their child. And the king believed her. Second child stolen, a third child taken as well. And each time the story repeated, each time the queen stayed silent. The shirts weren't finished. And even the court turned against her. Whispers became verdict. The queen, who had never spoke, had taken three royal children. And they said she'd eaten them, hiding her guilt behind silence. So when the king was pressed by his council and his mother, he gave an order. She was to be burned at the stake. And on the day of her execution, she carried the shirts in her arms, 11 completely finished, one nearly finished. And as the guards led her through the courtyard, she kept her eyes on the sky. The fire was already lit, the stake was waiting, and then the sound of wings. 12 ducks descended and they circled once, circled twice, and landed. And as they touched the ground, she threw the shirts one by one by one, and each shirt fell across the duck's back. The feathers disappeared, and the men returned, each brother whole again, except for the youngest. His shirt only had one sleeve. One wing remained, but they were back. The curse was finally broken. And with her brothers beside her, she spoke for the first time in years. Her voice filled the courtyard, steady, quiet, final. And she told the king everything: the curse, the silence, the shirts, the children. And then her brothers opened the pit. All three children were still alive. The king turned pale. He looked at his mother, the old queen. and asked, "What punishment should be given to a person who could commit such a crime?" And she answered without hesitation, "That person should be torn apart by 12 horses." And that's what they did. Now the young queen was freed, and her children returned, and her brothers stayed with her, wing and all, and no one ever asked her to explain her silence again. Now, you may recognize this story as Snow White, but the original version is very different from the one Disney gave us, isn't it? So my last question for you is, what did you experience in the story, and how would you retell it?